In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the starter spring on a Ryobi handheld gas blower. Let's get started. We'll begin by removing the blower tube. It just simply turns and then pulls away from the blower. Next, we'll remove the side housing on the blower. It's a little easier to remove the side housing if we also remove this base extension. Now we can go ahead and remove the side housing. Now we have access to the fan, and we'll remove it next. The fan is held in place with this nut. The problem is when we try to turn the nut, we just turn the fan and the motor shaft. So to remove this, what we'll do is remove the spark plug and then bind up the cylinder with a short piece of starter rope. And now just thread the starter rope down into the cylinder. The rope just fills the space between the top of the piston and the top of the cylinder, so the piston can no longer move up and down. Now I can remove the nut and the fan. Now we'll turn our attention to the other side of the blower. Here I'll remove the air filter cover and the side cover. Next, I'm going to remove the throttle cable from the carburetor. Now I'll go ahead and remove the other half of the housing from the engine assembly. Now we have access to the starter assembly. I'll go ahead and remove these 3 tabs that hold the starter pulley in place. Now I can remove the starter pulley. With the starter pulley out of the way, now I can remove the starter spring assembly. Here I have our new starter spring, and we'll begin reassembling it. It goes in with the spring down against the housing, and you'll notice this loop on the spring that lines up with a tab down in the housing. Now we'll install our new starter rope onto our starter pulley. The rope has this crimp on the end. On some blowers you may not have a crimp and you'd end up tying a knot. I placed the crimp in this opening on the starter pulley. Then I'll thread the rope through the hole in the pulley and out the side. Now here's where things get a little bit tricky. We need to wind tension back onto the spring. Normally on most starters when you do this, you would wind the tension and then install the rope. But with this design, we have to install the rope first. Ryobi has provided a little notch on the starter pulley. I run the rope back and into that notch. Now I place the starter pulley back into the housing and engage it with the spring. Now I'll rotate the pulley around a number of times until we put tension back on that spring. It's important that you keep downward pressure on this pulley at all times, because we're putting tension on that spring. If you were to let go of this, the whole assembly would come flying out of the starter housing. Alright, that should do it. Now again, it's important that I keep downward pressure on this pulley. And I'll reinstall these tabs that hold the pulley in place. Now before I install this third tab, I need to thread the starter rope through the eyelets on the housing. So I'll back the rope up until it lines up with the first eyelet, and then I'll thread the rope through that eyelet and through the second one in the housing, and then I'll pull all this rope through the housing. Now I can install the tab. Now carefully run the rope back around the pulley. I don't want to run all the rope though, or we'll have to start over. I'll go ahead and tie off a knot on the end of the rope. Now run the rope through our starter grip and tie a knot on the end. With the rope tied off there, I can go ahead and remove the first knot that we tied in the rope. Now we'll begin reassembly. First I'll slide the washer back over the motor shaft. Now I can align the housing over the motor shaft. Now I'll secure the housing to the engine with the screws. I'll slide the spacer tube back over the engine shaft. Now I'll reinstall the motor housing. Now I'll go ahead and reinstall the throttle cable. Now I'll reinstall the air filter cover. I'll place the gasket and then align and secure the cover. First, I'll place one of the large washers beneath the impeller, then the impeller back onto the shaft, followed by the second large washer and the nut. And I'll secure the nut with a ratchet wrench. And now we can pull the rope from the cylinder. And I'll go ahead and replace the spark plug. Now I'll reinstall the fan housing. Now I'll slide the base extension back into the housing and secure it with the screws. And we'll finish up by reinstalling the blower tube.